I never believed retirement would hold. People like me, we don't walk away clean. We pretend we do, but deep down we know the work doesn't let go. It waits, like a shadow that always knows where you live. I had made my peace with the silence, the long nights, the dull rhythm of life away from secret halls and unmarked doors. Then came the day when the silence finally broke, and everything I thought I left behind came flooding back. It started with the desert. I was driving west, no destination, just empty roads to keep my mind from rusting. The air shimmered above the asphalt, and the sky was a hard, merciless blue. I saw them before they wanted me to see them. Black SUVs, parked too neat on the roadside, suits waiting with the patience of hunters. They didn't wave me down, didn't flash badges, just stood there, watching, as if they knew I'd stop. And of course I did, because men like me don't get coincidence. We get summons. Director Rourke was waiting underground, beneath the cracked shell of an abandoned airfield. The years hadn't softened him. His face was stone, only the eyes alive. Restless, hungry, like something gnawed at him from the inside. The room he led me to wasn't a briefing chamber or a lab. It was colder, emptier. Nothing but steel walls sweating condensation, and in the center, under heavy floodlights, a door that wasn't a door. It stood taller than any man, an arch of stone black as volcanic glass, veins of silver running across it like frozen lightning. Symbols spiraled along its frame, shifting subtly when I tried to focus, the way words in a nightmare refused to hold still. I knew in that instant why I'd been dragged here. No satellite project, no weapons test, no black budget research. This thing was older than all of that, older than us. Rourke broke the silence finally. His voice carried the weight of a man who had repeated the same line too many times without believing it anymore. Every 18 hours, Elias. It opens. He didn't have to explain what he meant. I had already felt it. A low hum crawling through the floor, rattling my bones. The arch wasn't dormant. It was alive, waiting. He showed me the recordings. Cameras had been pushed inside, tethered by cables. What they captured looked like dreams half finished by some other mind. Forests of metallic trees under skies fractured with purple storms. Plains where shadows moved but cast no owners. The feeds broke down quickly. Static, distortion, glimpses of things moving just beyond the frame. But enough. Enough to know it wasn't Earth. I asked the only question left to ask. Who has gone through? Rourke's pause told me more than his answer. Drones, probes, and people. They didn't return. He looked at me then, as if daring me to refuse, as if already knowing I wouldn't. I should have walked away. I should have told him that door belonged sealed forever. But there was something in the hum, something in the way those symbols seemed to lean toward me. Curiosity is a curse, and mine was awake again. Preparation felt perfunctory. A device strapped to my wrist, pulsing with a countdown, synced to the gate's rhythm. Contact lenses that sharpened light, distorting the edges like I was already dreaming. A sensor pressed against the base of my skull, humming faintly. Monitoring me for changes, they said, as if the real danger could be measured with wires and circuits. The countdown reached its mark. The hum deepened, turning the air heavy, pressing into my chest until my breath came shallow. The stone of the arch shuddered, and then it opened. Not like a door swings, not like curtains parting. The center dissolved, peeled back, revealing a depth that wasn't distance. A place not meant for human eyes. Green light bled through, carrying with it a smell of wet earth and metal. Sweet, sharp, nauseating. Rourke didn't speak. No farewell, no good luck. Just that stare. Like a man watching someone step into a grave, he dug himself. I placed my hand against the surface. Warm. Almost like skin. It yielded, pulled. I took one breath, then another, and stepped forward. Crossing was like drowning in air, My skin prickled, my stomach lurched, my ears rang with a pressure that bent thought. Then it snapped. The world rushed back in a flood of sound and scent too thick, too alive. I staggered, catching myself on the trunk of a tree that wasn't a tree. Its bark gleamed faintly, damp and metallic to the touch. The leaves above shimmered deep blue, shifting like oil under light. The air buzzed faintly, as if invisible insects swarmed the edges of perception. I turned, half expecting the arch to be gone. But it stood behind me, humming, a sickly glow bleeding from its center. Then, with a shuddering sigh, it sealed itself shut. My wrist display began its slow bleed downward, 18 hours until it opened again. 18 hours alone in a place no human belonged. I listened. No birds, no wind. Just a low thrum beneath everything, like the pulse of a buried giant. Every step I took sank into soil that gave slightly, too damp, too warm, as if it resented my weight. Vines curled lazily along the ground, moving just enough to make me wonder if I imagined it. And the smell, damp sweetness, laced with something coppery, metallic, sharp in the lungs. For a long moment I stood still, fighting the instinct to panic. I told myself this was reconnaissance, nothing more. Observe, document, survive. But already I felt it. The weight of unseen eyes pressing from the undergrowth, the silence of something vast, holding its breath. And that was when I saw the first sign. Carved into the trunk beside me, faint but deliberate, was a symbol. Not part of the arch, not the shifting runes from before. Different, human, or something like it. A spiral cut into the bark, edges worn, but recent enough that the tree hadn't healed. My chest tightened. Someone had been here before me. The gate hadn't brought me first. It had been feeding longer than I imagined. And the thought that drifted unbidden into my mind. Maybe it didn't just open to anywhere. Maybe it chose who it let inside. Maybe it had been waiting. For me. The spiral carved into the tree haunted me as I moved further from the gate. It wasn't the shape itself, but the implication. Proof that another hand had been here before mine. Whoever they were, the forest had not buried their trail completely. That thought followed me with every step. The undergrowth thickened quickly. Vines as broad as my wrist tangled around roots that gleamed as if wet, though no rain had fallen. Each leaf overhead shimmered with a metallic luster, turning the canopy into a distorted mirror of the alien light filtering through. It gave everything an unnatural glow, like walking inside a cathedral built by something that had never seen Earth. My boots sank deeper into soil that pulsed with warmth, forcing me to slow down. The place felt alive, not metaphorically, but as though the ground itself breathed beneath me. I told myself to catalogue everything, the way the air held a faint shimmer, how the colours bent slightly when I moved my head, the distant sounds that echoed like bird calls but broke apart into jagged fragments. It was the sort of detail I would once have filed away for debriefing, but now it only built the dread gnawing at me. This world wasn't indifferent to my presence. It seemed aware. Hours blurred as I followed what looked like a path. Depressions in the soil, too orderly to be natural. Some were shallow, some deep, as if made by different weights, pressing through over time. I crouched to study one print, narrow at the heel, elongated at the front, almost human, but tipped with marks that looked like claws. The impression was old, yet still clear. Whoever left it had been more than a rumour. I moved on, senses straining against the silence that never quite held. Now and then, movement rippled through the foliage, too quick to follow, too deliberate to dismiss. My pulse quickened each time I turned and found only stillness, the branches swaying as if mocking me for noticing. That unseen audience pressed closer with every mile I walked. The first real evidence of human presence came when the trail bent toward a cluster of stone outcroppings. At the base of one, hidden under mats of vine, I uncovered rusted metal. A tool, a pickaxe, weathered, half swallowed by the earth. Nearby, a canteen lay dented and scarred, its surface marked with the faint insignia of a unit long forgotten. My breath caught. These weren't relics of some ancient civilization. They were ours. Someone had crossed before. Someone had left fragments of their struggle behind. I brushed away dirt from the canteen, and the metal left a residue that smelled of decay, as though it had been here far longer than possible. Deeper still, I found another sign. A tree carved with more symbols. Not the same spiral, but jagged lines and shapes etched in desperate haste. The grooves felt brittle, as if scorched into the bark. My fingers tingled when I touched them, a static charge that bit into my skin. I withdrew quickly, heart racing, knowing I was touching the aftermath of something that didn't want to be remembered. The light overhead dimmed, though I could not find a sun to explain it. The forest seemed to inhale, shadows thickening, air heavy with dampness. It was then I noticed the first sound that did not belong to the forest itself. A faint clink, metal on stone, carrying through the trees. I froze, listening. It came again. Rhythmic, purposeful. Someone working, or something mimicking the noise. I edged toward it, careful not to disturb the underbrush. The sound died as abruptly as it began. In its place, a silence so deep I felt my heartbeat crash against it. Then, just beyond the clearing ahead, I saw marks in the soil. Not one, but several footprints, overlapping, layered over years perhaps. Some were long and narrow like the earlier print, others shorter, with rounded toes. Human enough to tighten the knot in my gut. But among them, one was different. Enormous, pressed so deep the edges still crumbled when I touched them. Whatever made it had carried weight beyond any human frame. A breath escaped me without permission. The hair on my arms lifted. I wasn't alone. Not in theory, not in whispers. The evidence was carved into the ground at my feet. My visor flickered then, light fracturing across my vision, as though something had stepped between me and the device's signal. I ripped it off for a moment, and the world swam in a raw, unsettling clarity. The air glowed faintly, particles drifting like spores, and every branch looked poised to move. I pressed forward, driven by a force I couldn't name. Curiosity had kept me alive in the past, but now it felt more like compulsion. As if the gate hadn't just let me in, it had pointed me here. The trail widened into a clearing, and at its heart rose something unmistakable. A structure. Rough stones stacked into a formation resembling an altar. The surface bore carvings far more deliberate than the scattered symbols on the trees. Spirals intertwined with lines that jagged outward like lightning strikes, meeting at a central point. My skin prickled just looking at it. Near the base, half buried, I found a fragment of bone. Smooth, pale, rounded in a way I recognized instantly. A human skull, or what was left of one. Algae clung to its surface, blurring the edges, as though the world itself had tried to reclaim it. The jaw was missing, the top fractured. I stared, unable to look away, until the silence cracked. Somewhere close, too close, something moved with intent. Slow steps pressed into the soil, careful, as though whatever it was had learned to stalk. I backed toward the altar, eyes sweeping the tree line, heart thundering. And there, half concealed in the shadows, shapes shifted. Figures. Tall, thin, limbs bent wrong, eyes reflecting the faint light. They stood just beyond the reach of detail, watching. The hum from the gate echoed faintly through the ground, even from miles away, reminding me that time was bleeding down. 18 hours. Now less. I was being watched, and whatever lingered in the trees knew I had nowhere else to go. They did not advance. The shapes stayed rooted at the tree line, their outlines trembling in the half-light like heat rising off pavement. I tried not to blink, but the longer I watched them, the less certain I became that they had faces at all. Their posture suggested thought, hesitation, as if they weighed the value of letting me continue or ending me there. When I took one slow step back from the altar, Several of them mirrored the motion, bending slightly forward, their heads tilting unnaturally in unison. The resemblance to humanity made it worse. I felt as though I was being studied by reflections that had lost the memory of what they once were. The silence pressed hard. My own breathing felt too loud. Then, without warning, the figures slipped away, dissolving into the foliage as if swallowed by the forest itself. One moment there, the next erased. My stomach knotted tighter. I wanted to believe I had imagined them, but the soil near the clearing betrayed fresh impressions, elongated prints, splayed toes that narrowed into points. They had been real enough to leave weight behind. I circled the altar, forcing myself to stay alert, though every instinct screamed to retreat. The carvings along the stone seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, lines curling into spirals that pulled the eye inward. Near the base, smeared across the rock in dark, chalky strokes, was writing. Not carved, but scrawled. Letters rough and uneven, yet undeniably human. My chest tightened as I traced the words with my eyes. Don't trust the gate. The message was as much plea as warning, the strokes uneven as if written by a trembling hand. Whoever left it had known despair more final than anything I could yet imagine. My mind reeled. If the gate itself could not be trusted, what chance did I have? Yet that was the only tether back to something resembling home. I forced myself to breathe, to ground myself in the simple act of counting the rise and fall of my chest. The visor on my eyes flickered again, colors splitting briefly before correcting. A warning. The environment interfered with everything, even the tools meant to protect me. I left the clearing, following another trail carved faintly into the soil. The canopy darkened as if dusk had fallen, though no sun dipped beyond the horizon. Shadows stretched and curled in ways that defied angles. The air thickened with a damp haze that made each inhale feel weighted. Time itself began to slip. My wrist display ticked steadily, yet minutes stretched like hours, my steps dragging against unseen resistance. The further I walked, the more signs I found that others had been drawn here. A boot print pressed deep into mud, still sharp despite the surrounding growth. A length of torn fabric snagged on a thorned vine, the edges stiff with age. These were no relics of explorers from some distant past. They were the remains of colleagues, predecessors, or prisoners of the gate's cycle. Each fragment told me the same truth. No one had escaped unchanged. Then I saw them again, not figures this time, but remains. Half hidden beneath twisted roots lay a ribcage, bleached but intact, its shape unmistakably human. Growths clung to the bone, threads of fungus woven through like veins. I crouched, breath shallow, and saw that the skull was missing. Not torn away by animals, but fused into the earth as though the world itself had absorbed it. My skin crawled as I pulled back. The transformation I had glimpsed in the figures earlier wasn't sudden. It was gradual. Flesh, bone, memory, all consumed until nothing human remained. The haze thickened, and with it came sound. Not whispers this time, but fragments of voices that rose and fell with the wind. Familiar tones that clawed at recognition. Voices of my past. My father calling me as a boy, colleagues laughing over long nights, even the sound of a woman I once loved. All cut short, warped at the edges, like broken recordings. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voices burrowed deeper, vibrating through bone rather than air. The forest wasn't just observing me, it was reaching inside, rifling through memory, pulling what it wanted. I staggered forward until my legs buckled at the edge of another clearing. Here, stone pillars jutted from the soil in a half circle, their surfaces carved with more spirals. In the center, lying crooked in the dirt, was a set of dog tags. I lifted them with trembling fingers, brushing away grime to reveal the faded imprint of a name. The letters were barely legible, but they were English, unmistakably from Earth. My chest constricted with dread. Whoever had carried them had been claimed by this place long ago. As I turned the tags in my hand, The air shifted. My visor dimmed, struggling to adjust. Shapes pulled at the tree line again, dozens this time. Their forms were clearer now. Elongated limbs, eyes too large for their sockets, skin marbled with patches that gleamed as though alive with spores. They crouched low, watching with a patience that bordered on ritual. None advanced, but I knew the choice was theirs, not mine. The way they tilted their heads in eerie unison told me what I did not want to admit. They understood me. My wrist display pulsed red for the first time, reading spiking erratically. Time stuttered, seconds jumping, skipping, doubling back. My knees trembled as dizziness crashed through me. I gripped a pillar to stay upright, the carvings beneath my palm buzzing with faint warmth. The forest pressed closer, the creatures unmoving, the air alive with voices I knew and did not know. I had thought myself an intruder, but now it was clear. I was the one being tested. Somewhere deep inside, a voice, my own or not, whispered the truth I refused to speak aloud. The gate hadn't simply opened, it had invited, and it had never promised to let me leave. The world tilted, as though the forest itself had shifted around me while I blinked. When my vision steadied, the pillars behind me were gone, replaced by walls of vegetation that hadn't been there moments before. My wrist device throbbed with erratic pulses, the countdown stuttering forward and back like a heartbeat out of rhythm. The sense of time fractured so completely that I no longer trusted the rise and fall of my own breath. The haze thickened until even my outstretched hand blurred. Light radiated from no clear source, filtering through the fog as if the air had been lit from within. My skin prickled with static, every hair standing on end. The figures that had been watching me dissolved into the gloom, but I couldn't convince myself they were gone. The weight of their stares clung to me, a pressure at the base of my skull. I forced myself forward, each step heavy, the soil clinging to my boots like wet clay. The silence gave way to sound again, but not the voices from before. This time it was low, resonant, a vibration that crawled through the marrow of my bones. The forest thrummed like a massive organ, every trunk and root pulsing with unseen veins. It wasn't sound carried through the air. It was alive inside the ground, inside me. At the edge of the fog, I stumbled into another clearing. What I saw froze me where I stood. A skeleton leaned upright against a twisted tree, ribs protruding, skull half embedded in bark as if the tree had grown through it. The bones shimmered faintly, coated in a translucent film that looked like crystal but pulsed like flesh. I staggered closer and realized with horror that the tree itself bore fragments of clothing, fabric stretched and fused with bark. The person hadn't died here. They had been absorbed, consumed by the world, until the line between flesh and root vanished. I stumbled back, bile burning in my throat. The buzzing in my skull grew louder, words threading faintly through it. Not whispers, not memories, but commands. Half-formed thoughts in a language my mind bent to translate. Stay. Become. Belong. The words hammered behind my eyes until I forced myself away from the tree, choking down panic with shallow breaths. The ground sloped downward, drawing me toward a narrow ravine carved through the forest. The soil glistened as though slick with oil, yet the air stank of iron. I followed it because there was nowhere else to go, because the world seemed to close behind me each time I tried to turn back. The path curled until it opened into a cavernous hollow where roots hung like chains. In the center lay another altar, this one larger, its surface covered with spirals so deep they looked burned into stone. The marks glowed faintly, as if filled with molten light. On the altar, half buried in ash, rested a skull. But this one was not like the others I had seen. It had elongated ridges, stretched jawbones, eye sockets warped into sharp angles. Human enough to unnerve me, alien enough to make my chest tighten with dread. Beside it, etched directly into the stone, were words carved by human hand. It never lets you go. The air vibrated, growing heavier, until my knees buckled. I pressed my palms to the soil, which felt warm, pliant, almost like flesh. The pulse beneath it beat in time with my own heart, and for one disorienting instant, I couldn't tell which rhythm belonged to me. The visor flashed with error signals, then died entirely, leaving me in the raw, undistorted glow of the cavern. My device on the wrist spasmed, numbers collapsing into unreadable symbols. From the shadows beyond the altar came movement. Not one figure this time, but several, their forms slipping into clarity. They crawled forward on limbs too long, their bodies bent and malformed. I saw patches of fabric clinging to them, tatters of uniforms, scraps of insignia. The truth hit like ice water. These were not creatures born of this place. They had been explorers once, maybe soldiers, scientists, anyone who had passed through the gate. Now they belonged to the world, their humanity stripped until nothing remained but husks shaped by survival. One lifted its head toward me. Its eyes were wide, shining faintly with a wet gleam, and for a moment I thought I saw recognition flicker there. It reached forward slowly, fingers trembling as if asking me to take its hand. My own hand lifted against my will, compelled by a pull that came not from compassion, but from the will of the place itself. I stopped only when the bone-deep hum sharpened into a screech that split through the hollow. The figures recoiled, vanishing into the chains of roots with insect-like swiftness. My vision blurred, the cavern spinning as if the ground itself had shifted. When I staggered upright, the altar had changed. The skull was gone, replaced by something small and metallic half buried in the ash. I brushed it free and found a badge, a military emblem, corroded yet unmistakably of Earth origin. The edges cut into my palm as I clenched it, the weight of it more terrible than the alien skull had been. Proof that others had stood exactly where I was now, and none had returned. The buzzing rose again, voices threading through the air in overlapping layers. My own name whispered from unseen mouths, repeated until it lost all meaning. The words braided together into a single phrase that chilled me more than any figure watching from the dark. The gate is not a door. The gate is a mouth. The cavern trembled with the sound, soil shifting beneath my boots as if the entire world inhaled. I stumbled back toward the path, clutching the badge, unable to tell whether it had been left as a warning or an invitation. My wrist device sputtered once more, flickered, and then displayed the countdown again. But the numbers no longer matched the rhythm I remembered. Time was no longer mine to measure. And in the growing darkness, I realized the world was closing in around me, rearranging itself so that no path could ever lead me out. The ground would not hold still beneath me. Each time I thought I recognized the trail back, the world folded around itself, rearranging trees and ridges until I circled into places I swore I had never seen. My wrist device was useless, numbers pulsing in chaotic loops, sometimes racing forward, sometimes freezing altogether. I kept moving, because stopping meant surrendering to the pull that begged me to lie down, to let the forest stitch me into its skin like all the others. The badge in my pocket burned against my leg, a reminder that men had tried before me, and had failed. At last, through the wavering haze, I glimpsed a glow that did not belong to the forest. The gate. Its frame flickered, sometimes whole, sometimes shattered into shards of light. Relief crashed through me, though it was poisoned with doubt. The message carved in stone echoed in my skull. Don't trust the gate. Every instinct screamed to turn away, yet the thought of remaining here, swallowed and reshaped, was worse. I stumbled toward it, branches clawing at me like hands trying to restrain me. The hum deepened as I approached, vibrating through the marrow of my bones, pulling at me as though the gate hungered. Shadows rippled at the edges of the clearing, the figures returning, circling, their eyes glinting with a sorrow that chilled me more than rage would have. They didn't lunge, didn't block me. They simply watched, their heads tilting in silent judgment. I realized then that they were not guardians of the gate. They were what it left behind. I reached out. The surface shimmered with warmth, softer than stone, pliant like flesh. For one breathless instant, I hesitated. If I stepped through, where would it send me? Was there any chance at all it would deliver me back to my world, or would it discard me into another, just as alien, just as wrong? Behind me, the forest stirred. Roots shifted underfoot, tightening like nooses. The choice was no longer mine. The gate wanted me. The world folded as I passed through. Heat and cold collided in waves, every nerve in my body alight. Then, silence. The oppressive hum vanished, replaced by the sterile echo of metal walls. I collapsed onto solid flooring, gasping. My eyes adjusted, and I saw the hangar. Familiar lights, familiar walls. The air tasted dry, industrial, lifeless. I had returned. Or so I thought. Figures in lab coats stood at the far side of the chamber, murmuring to each other. Director Rourke moved through them, his expression unreadable. Relief warred with suspicion on his face. He approached slowly, not like a man greeting a survivor, but as though approaching a specimen. "Welcome back," he said. His voice carried none of the triumph I expected, only caution, only doubt. I pushed myself upright, body trembling, words catching in my throat. "It worked," I rasped. "I came back." Rourke's eyes narrowed. He glanced at the staff behind him. None of them moved closer. None offered a hand. Instead, one produced a device that clicked and whirred, scanning the air around me. Their whispers sharpened into nervous fragments, interference, anomalous readings, not stable. I froze as the meaning settled in. They weren't relieved to see me. They were afraid. Rourke motioned the others away and lowered his voice. "You should understand something, Elias. No one has ever truly come back, not the same way. The gate doesn't open to a fixed point. It connects to parallels, reflections of our world, sometimes close, sometimes twisted, but never identical." My blood ran cold. "You're saying, this isn't my world?" His silence was enough. The confirmation I dreaded lay in his eyes. I thought of the spirals etched in stone, of the message scorched into bark, of the voices that had torn through my memories. The gate was not a passage. It was a cycle, pulling souls from one place and depositing them into another like a cruel game with infinite boards. The place I had returned to wore the same face as home, but it was not mine. Not truly. Rourke finally spoke again, voice low. "The man who stood in your place here, he never returned. Your family buried an empty coffin. Your colleagues grieved. This world lost its Elias Vane. And now you stand here, wearing his shadow." The words cut deeper than any wound. I glanced around at the staff, their eyes avoiding mine, their whispers never ceasing. To them I was familiar but wrong, a distortion wearing the shape of someone they had already mourned. My wrist device flickered, its numbers still unstable, as though mocking me with the truth. I had crossed, but I hadn't come home. Rourke placed a folder on the table nearby, sliding it toward me. My name scrawled across the cover. I opened it with trembling hands and found reports, photographs, fragments of a life nearly identical to mine, yet marked by differences subtle enough to break me. A childhood detail shifted, a mission outcome altered, faces in the photographs smiling with knowledge of a man who was me, but not me. The file smelled of dust and finality. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the crushing weight of dislocation. I was a stranger in a place that demanded I wear a mask already forged. The gate had given me back nothing but the wrong earth. Rourke's gaze hardened. "You need to decide, Elias. Try again and risk being cast further adrift, or remain here in the life that belonged to another. Either way, you don't get what you lost." The truth settled over me like ash. There was no going back. There was only choosing which prison to call my own. The folder trembled in my hands as I closed it. The weight of that other Elias, the man whose life had been stolen by the gate, settled over me like a shroud. Rourke's words pressed deeper than any blade. Stay and inherit a life that wasn't mine, or step through again and risk being scattered into countless reflections until nothing remained recognizable. There was no choice that didn't bleed. I walked the corridors after Rourke dismissed me, every face I passed tightening the knot in my chest. Technicians and guards stole glances at me when they thought I wasn't looking. Some turned away, unwilling to meet my eyes. A few stared too long, their expressions flickering between recognition and unease. I could feel it in the air. They wanted to believe their Elias had returned, but some instinct told them otherwise. I was an echo trying to walk in a voice already gone. That night, or what passed for it in a facility where time was stripped of meaning, I sat in the quarters they assigned me. Everything in the room felt wrong. The books on the shelf were ones I had owned in my real home, but the spines bore titles shifted just slightly from memory. Photographs on the desk showed faces I loved, but details betrayed them. A smile too restrained, a background altered, a scar that should not exist. This world was precise enough to fool the careless, but not me. It was close, and that made it worse. Sleep offered no mercy. My dreams filled with the hum of the gate, spirals chasing themselves into infinity, voices repeating my name until it broke apart into noise. When I woke, I thought I saw shadows in the corners of the room, thin figures with glinting eyes, watching as they had in the forest. They didn't move when I looked at them. They simply lingered, waiting for me to accept that I had brought them across with me. The contamination was not in my blood or my mind. It was in my existence itself. Days blurred, or perhaps hours. Rourke visited only once more, his tone clipped, as though weary of carrying truths he no longer wished to speak aloud. "You can attempt another crossing," he said. "But understand, each return moves you further from where you began. Every Earth you land in will know you less. Every life will slip further from the one you remember. Eventually, there will be nothing left to anchor you at all." I asked him then if anyone had ever found their way home. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was enough. I tried to live among them for a time. I studied their records, walked their halls, even stood in the desert air above the buried facility. But the world itself betrayed me. Street names misaligned with memory. The stars overhead shifted in ways my eyes couldn't dismiss. And the people stared. Friends smiled with affection, but I saw hesitation in the corners of their eyes. My reflection in glass seemed fractionally wrong, features misaligned by fractions too subtle to define. The more I clung to this place, the more it rejected me. The gate did not leave me alone. I heard its hum even when it stood dormant, vibrations coiling up through the concrete as though it whispered beneath the earth. The more I resisted, the louder it grew, until every wall seemed to pulse with its rhythm. The message carved into stone returned to me in waking thought. It never lets you go. The final time I walked into the hangar, no one tried to stop me. Rourke stood at the far side, his face pale in the harsh lights. He didn't ask why I had come. He only watched, knowing the answer already. The gate loomed ahead, silent, its surface dull and lifeless. But I felt the stirrings within it, the slow inhale before another cycle began. My wrist device, though broken, flickered faintly, as if drawn back to life by its pulse. I placed the badge I had carried from that other world on the table beside me. Metal cold and corroded, it was the last tether to men who had walked this path and never returned. A reminder of what waited in the infinite labyrinth of reflections. Perhaps they still wandered there, twisted into forms I could not recognize. Perhaps that was my future too. The gate shuddered. Its frame rippled, symbols crawling along its surface like fire beneath glass. Light spilled outward in uneven waves, pulling at the air. My body trembled, not with fear this time, but with surrender. There was no home to reclaim, no world that would recognize me. Only the mouth waiting to devour me again. I stepped closer. The hum rose until it swallowed everything, drowning thought, drowning memory. For a heartbeat, I saw them again. The watchers at the tree line, the half-human remnants, the faces of those who had walked before. They stared not with menace, but with pity, as though welcoming me into a communion I had resisted for too long. My hand met the surface, warm, alive. The world behind me flickered. Rourke's figure blurred, his eyes narrowing as though seeing me fade into something else. The last words I heard were not his. They came from everywhere and nowhere, in voices mine and not mine, layered together into one final truth. The gate does not return. The gate consumes. And with that, I stepped into the light, leaving behind a world that was never mine, and entered whatever waited beyond.